Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
I'd poured 5 exhausting years of sweat, tears, and far more dollars than I cared to admit into making my younger brother Alex's birthday parties the envy of every parent on our block. Events so meticulously planned and lavishly executed, they often resembled mini weddings rather than casual backyard celebrations. But the moment I heard my mother's biting words, spat loudly enough to echo across the bustling patio filled with our closest friends and relatives. Emma just wants people to praise her. Something inside me irrevocably snapped. The casual venom with which she uttered the statement, as if her bitterness had finally bubbled over after years of simmering quietly beneath fake smiles and stiff hugs, sent a shockwave through my spine, mingling hot shame with a sharp, sudden clarity that was equal parts devastating and liberating. My carefully built image as the tireless older sister, always eager to support and uplift, felt instantly reduced to nothing more than desperate vanity, twisted by my mother's cunning tongue into an ugly display of self-serving grandeur. Before I could stop myself, my feet moved toward her, each step pounding the patio stones beneath me with a clarity that drowned out the awkward laughter and hushed whispers, now erupting in ripples through the gathered guests. The crumpled receipt in my hand, proof of yet another ridiculously extravagant cake that I had purchased out of my own pocket, felt suddenly heavier, symbolic of every moment I'd spent tirelessly planning and organizing, every unnoticed sacrifice, every quiet disappointment swallowed down for the sake of familial peace. Without meeting her gaze, which I felt like daggers piercing through the soft layer of composure I struggled to maintain, I handed my mother the receipt, watching as confusion briefly flickered across her carefully painted features, replaced quickly by the simmering anger that lay perpetually just beneath the surface of her polished exterior. "Here's the praise you think I crave, Mom," I said quietly yet distinctly, my voice barely shaking despite the emotional storm raging in my chest. "And it cost a lot more than you ever gave me credit for." Turning swiftly, feeling the stunned silence of the patio, now punctuated only by my hurried footsteps and the murmurs of disbelief, I moved through the crowd, pushing back tears with determination so fierce I felt it burning my throat. I wasn't seeking praise or adoration. I simply wanted acknowledgement, appreciation, even a fleeting glance of genuine gratitude for the years I had quietly poured my heart into making Alex's birthdays special. Instead, I had become an easy target for my mother's calculated jabs, her resentment disguised as concern, her subtle sabotage conveniently masked as motherly worry. As I drove away, the sun setting behind me, casting long shadows across my dashboard, I felt a strange relief washing over me, a weight lifted from shoulders burdened by expectations that were never truly mine to carry. Yet, alongside this newfound freedom came the relentless pang of uncertainty, amplified moments later by the buzzing of my phone, illuminating a message from Alex. "Mom's furious, Emma, but you have no idea what you've just done." The cryptic words twisted my stomach into anxious knots, planting seeds of doubt that began rapidly sprouting fears I wasn't ready to face. Barely 20 minutes later, parked in the dim solitude of an empty shopping plaza parking lot, nursing my wounded pride and conflicted emotions, my phone buzzed again, this time a frantic call from my cousin Sarah, her usually composed voice shaken by urgency. "Emma, the cake, it collapsed. Literally fell apart on the table. Everyone's panicking and Mom's blaming you loudly." The absurdity of the image nearly brought hysterical laughter bubbling from my lips. Instead, a hollow emptiness settled deeper into my chest, mirroring the wreckage I'd left behind, now perfectly symbolized by a ruined cake splattered across my meticulously decorated tablecloth. I closed my eyes tightly, allowing the irony of the moment to sink in fully. After years of ensuring perfection for everyone else's sake, the first event I'd abandoned had crumbled spectacularly without me, a cruel yet satisfying confirmation that perhaps my effort truly had been the only thing holding this family's superficial harmony intact. But beneath this satisfaction that was the lingering dread of what would come next, because deep down I knew that my act of defiance tonight was only the beginning, a small rebellion destined to ignite a series of explosions I wasn't yet prepared to handle. And as the echoes of my mother's words continued hauntingly repeating themselves in my mind, I felt a cold determination settling firmly within me, whispering quietly that my revenge, subtle yet powerful, had only just begun. As I sat alone in my car, watching headlights flicker past me in the empty parking lot, while Sarah's panicked voice echoed in my ears, I began to fully grasp the magnitude of the chaos I'd unintentionally unleashed, realizing that my single act of rebellion, handing my mother the receipt and abruptly leaving Alex's party, had triggered a cascade of events so rapid and uncontrollable it seemed almost comically tragic. Sarah, who had always been the family peacekeeper and my confidant through years of simmering tension, now sounded genuinely distraught, her voice quivering as she described the cake collapse, emphasizing repeatedly how quickly everything spiraled into total disarray as my mother, Carol, loudly declared me responsible, painting me as vindictive and petty in front of stunned guests. Each venomous accusation felt like a physical blow, even from afar, punctuated by Sarah's desperate attempts to calm the storm of gossip and judgments that swirled rapidly around the patio, consuming every conversation like wildfire. But what stung deeper than my mother's predictable blame was learning from Sarah, through hesitant words and cautious hints, that Carol had quietly spent years shaping Alex's perspective of me, subtly and consistently planting seeds of doubt about my motivations, whispering quietly into his ears about imagined resentments and rivalries. Suddenly, the reason behind Alex's strained smiles, his polite but detached gratitude over recent years, and the growing emotional distance I'd struggled to ignore became painfully clear, unraveling my self-perception with startling clarity. The closeness I'd once shared with Alex had been methodically chipped away by a mother whose insecurities thrived on controlling the family narrative, painting herself as protector, arbitrator, and victim. A cunning puppeteer managing us like marionettes in her private theater of passive aggression. I felt anger simmering fiercely in my chest, a potent blend of hurt, betrayal, and newfound clarity, igniting a slow-burning desire to retaliate. Though this time my revenge would be more subtle and deliciously satisfying, designed to expose my mother's manipulations quietly, without giving her ammunition to further cast me as the villain. Driven by this desire, and fueled by the memories of countless subtle slights I'd previously overlooked, I sifted through old digital albums stored on my phone, carefully selecting embarrassing but harmless childhood photos of family vacations, awkward haircuts, and hilariously mismatched outfits, all perfectly innocent but distinctly unflattering images, specifically chosen to unsettle Carol's carefully cultivated public image as a poised, perfect mother. With a quiet sense of triumph, I anonymously shared the photos online in groups frequented by our extended family, knowing they would quickly circulate, becoming sources of amusement, gossip, and mild embarrassment, causing just enough disruption to give me quiet satisfaction without publicly branding myself as petty. Yet, the fleeting sense of victory quickly evaporated, replaced by anxious unease when Sarah called again hours later, speaking quietly as if afraid someone might overhear, revealing that during the aftermath of the cake disaster, she'd overheard Carol speaking urgently to Alex, quietly but firmly emphasizing that Emma, me, had no idea about the real reasons behind the strained relationships within our family, hinting ominously about deeper secrets that, if exposed, could irreversibly change how I saw myself and those closest to me. Sarah's reluctant disclosure left me frozen in uncertainty, consumed by curiosity and dread, as I struggled to imagine what hidden truths my mother could possibly harbor. Truths so significant they had remained carefully hidden beneath layers of smiles and quiet, calculated manipulations for decades. Driving home slowly that night, each passing streetlight casting elongated shadows across my car's interior, I replayed Sarah's words repeatedly in my mind, realizing that my rebellion at Alex's birthday party had inadvertently cracked open a door into a world of carefully concealed secrets. Secrets powerful enough that my father, Richard, who rarely involved himself in the family's emotional turmoil, felt compelled to leave a cryptic, urgent voicemail on my phone, advising me sternly to step back from further investigations. His voice, usually steady and comforting, was oddly strained, layered with a quiet desperation that unsettled me deeply, confirming my growing suspicion that my mother's casual cruelties and petty rivalries masked a much darker narrative hidden beneath the family's polished exterior. As the glow of my porch light illuminated the familiar silhouette of my home, I parked my car, heart pounding with a mix of trepidation and determination, fully aware that the battle I'd started at Alex's disastrous birthday was far from over. In fact, it had only intensified, shifting subtly from revenge to revelation, transforming me from passive victim to active participant in a conflict whose stakes were becoming increasingly unpredictable and potentially devastating. The following morning brought with it the stark reality of a sleepless night spent tossing and turning, haunted by Sarah's hesitant revelations, and my father's cryptic warning, leaving me filled with dread that my once comforting family dynamic had slowly eroded beneath my very feet, replaced now by a shifting, unstable ground of whispered secrets, hidden motives, and an unsettling tension that refused to subside. Every interaction I'd experienced with my mother, Carol, and my brother Alex, in recent memory, was suddenly cast into doubt, now colored differently by the knowledge of the invisible strings my mother had meticulously threaded through our lives, pulling quietly at the edges of our relationships, weaving an intricate web of half-truths and deliberate manipulations, ensuring her quiet dominance and our unsuspecting compliance. This realization was painful yet clarifying, fueling within me an urgent need to confront Alex directly, determined to unravel precisely how deeply Carol's insidious narrative had influenced his perception of me, and to challenge the distortions she'd subtly ingrained into his understanding of our sibling bond. I chose a public place, the small coffee shop Alex frequented every weekend, hoping the presence of strangers around us might encourage honesty and restraint, providing a controlled environment in which truths could surface safely, without descending into loud accusations or emotional meltdowns, which, given the tensions at play, seemed dangerously possible. When Alex arrived, visibly wary yet composed, his hesitant greeting and strained smile immediately confirmed my fears that Carol's narratives had deeply infiltrated his thoughts, leaving a wary distance between us, forged not by open conflict, but by the quiet, insidious power of our mother's whispers. It hurt deeply to see mistrust reflected subtly in his cautious glances and carefully neutral tone, a vivid reminder of the damage inflicted beneath the surface of our interactions, subtly corroding our bond despite the outward appearance of familial harmony. As we exchanged pleasantries that felt increasingly hollow and artificial, I finally forced the conversation toward uncomfortable truths, gently probing Alex's perspective on recent family events, subtly hinting at the tension and confusion that had surfaced prominently at his ruined birthday celebration, watching carefully as his defenses began to rise, triggered by the discomfort of confrontation. Gradually, Alex's veneer of politeness began to crack, revealing beneath it a storm of quiet resentment, anger, and hurt, emotions directed squarely at me, accusing me bitterly of overshadowing him at every stage of our lives, constantly demanding attention and praise at his expense, a narrative that I recognized immediately as echoes of Carol's careful manipulation, distorted reflections of reality she'd masterfully painted, framing me as the selfish antagonist of our shared childhood stories. His accusations, though twisted and exaggerated, still carried enough painful truth to pierce through my carefully maintained composure, igniting memories of moments from our shared past when jealousy and resentment had indeed flared briefly within me, though never in the cruel, persistent manner Carol portrayed. I suddenly remembered my teenage years, marked by Alex's effortless academic successes, awards proudly displayed by Carol on every available shelf, while my quieter accomplishments faded into obscurity, subtly overlooked, fostering a simmering frustration I'd quietly swallowed down, believing myself petty for feeling overshadowed. Now, faced directly with Alex's anger, itself born from Carol's careful distortions, I felt the weight of unspoken grievances pressing heavily upon me, recognizing painfully how Carol had weaponized these brief, normal sibling frustrations, magnifying them into deep, lasting scars that continued to fracture our relationship long after childhood. Determined not to spiral into further defensive arguments that Carol had anticipated, I instead made a quiet but decisive move toward subtle retaliation, orchestrating a carefully timed casual meeting with Alex's colleagues later that evening, attending undercover, presenting myself as merely an acquaintance rather than his sister, subtly slipping into casual conversations, seemingly harmless anecdotes that exposed minor embellishments Alex had shared about his achievements. Harmless yet embarrassing revelations designed specifically to gently unsettle the image he'd carefully cultivated at Carol's encouragement. Watching from afar, as subtle waves of embarrassment washed briefly over Alex's face during casual exchanges, I felt a fleeting satisfaction tinged heavily with guilt, acknowledging silently how dangerously close I'd come to mirroring Carol's manipulative patterns. Even if my intentions had been purely retaliatory, returning home later that night, unsettled and emotionally drained, my phone illuminated once more, this time displaying another missed call from my father, Richard, accompanied by a voicemail message whose urgency surpassed even the previous night's cryptic warning. Richard's voice trembled slightly, burdened by a mixture of fear and protectiveness I'd rarely heard from him, urging me desperately, almost pleadingly, to abandon my investigation immediately, hinting vaguely but ominously at truths too painful and dangerous to confront. Truths powerful enough to unravel, not just family bonds, but our very sense of identity. His stark warning sent a cold shiver down my spine, amplifying my dread, but also intensifying my stubborn determination to finally uncover the hidden narrative that had quietly shaped our lives beneath the polished surface of our seemingly ordinary family. As I laid awake once again that night, enveloped by silence punctuated only by the quiet ticking of my bedroom clock, I grappled deeply with conflicting emotions, recognizing painfully that my search for revenge had transformed gradually but irrevocably into a quest for truth, a truth whose unveiling threatened to dismantle everything I had ever understood about my family, myself, and my place within the carefully curated image my mother had constructed around us. The days that followed my confrontation with Alex dragged slowly, each hour weighted down by the heavy silence that had settled like an oppressive fog over my family, thick with unspoken accusations, simmering resentments, and a haunting sense of impending revelation that I couldn't seem to shake, no matter how desperately I attempted to distract myself. My father's urgent warnings, delivered quietly yet fervently through late-night voicemails that remained carefully vague yet disturbingly alarming, echoed persistently in my mind, amplifying my anxiety while simultaneously stoking my curiosity, pushing me inexorably toward uncovering the full truth behind the meticulously hidden secrets that Carol had so skillfully guarded for decades. I knew with a gut-churning certainty that confronting my father directly was no longer optional but absolutely necessary, if I was ever to regain a sense of peace and reclaim my own narrative from the intricate web of manipulations that Carol had silently spun around all of us, entrapping us in roles she had quietly but ruthlessly defined. When I finally summoned the courage to visit my father, Richard, choosing an evening when I knew Carol would be occupied elsewhere, I found him sitting quietly in his study, surrounded by old photographs and stacks of aging documents, the normally comforting familiarity of his presence now overshadowed by a tension that immediately thickened the air between us, reducing our initial exchanges to cautious pleasantries steeped in uneasy politeness. His eyes, normally warm and reassuring, were clouded with an unmistakable sadness and a heavy resignation, emotions so foreign to his typically composed demeanor that it momentarily left me speechless, confronted sharply by the depth of pain that he had clearly borne silently and alone, burdened by secrets too heavy and complicated to share openly without devastating consequences. Eventually, after a prolonged silence punctuated only by the gentle ticking of an antique clock perched carefully on his desk, he reluctantly began speaking, each word emerging hesitantly, as though he were weighing their potential impact carefully, painfully aware of the irreversible damage they could cause to our fragile family structure. Richard's voice shook slightly as he revealed the painful truth about Carol, describing with quiet yet heartbreaking honesty how my mother had long ago made a deliberate, emotionally costly decision, sacrificing a promising career opportunity to care for me during a life-threatening illness that had nearly claimed my life in infancy. A profound act of maternal sacrifice Carol had kept deliberately concealed, allowing resentment to fester quietly beneath her composed exterior for decades. Overwhelmed by this revelation, I suddenly understood, with devastating clarity, the roots of Carol's bitterness and emotional manipulation. Realizing that her subtle cruelties, her desperate need for control, and even her meticulously crafted victimhood narrative had all sprung from the deep well of unaddressed resentment stemming from that singular decision, a silent yet powerfully influential ghost that had quietly haunted our family ever since. The complexity of my feelings left me momentarily speechless, torn sharply between empathy and anger, compassion and resentment. Recognizing clearly for the first time the tragic depths of Carol's own emotional suffering, while still struggling to reconcile her pain with the deliberate harm she'd inflicted upon Alex and me over the years. Determined yet emotionally exhausted, I finally confronted Carol directly a few nights later during a tense family gathering, choosing carefully my moment of quiet revenge, presenting my revelations publicly but subtly, slipping carefully crafted hints of her hidden resentments and manipulations into casual conversation, knowing perfectly that each subtle jab was a precise and calculated response to her previous accusations against me. Watching closely as Carol's perfectly maintained composure finally began visibly crumbling beneath the carefully orchestrated weight of my revelations, feeling a quiet but profound satisfaction in seeing her facade of control fracture openly for the first time, yet simultaneously feeling a sharp pang of guilt and sadness at having contributed intentionally to her humiliation. This tangled blend of triumph and regret was heightened considerably when, in a rare moment of genuine vulnerability, Carol whispered quietly to me, amid the hushed tension of the crowded room, her voice cracking slightly beneath the weight of suppressed emotion. "If you knew what I sacrificed for you, Emma, you'd see me differently." Her words filled simultaneously with sadness, regret, and a subtle yet unmistakable plea for understanding and forgiveness. That night, unable to sleep yet again, haunted by Carol's desperate, whispered revelation, I felt more conflicted and uncertain than ever before, realizing starkly how deeply interconnected our emotional wounds truly were, each quietly feeding off the unresolved resentments and carefully concealed truths of the other, locking us permanently in a cycle of subtle emotional warfare. The line separating victim and aggressor, which had once seemed clearly defined, was now blurred significantly, complicating my desire for revenge, reshaping it into something deeper and far more challenging, an urgent, complicated need for closure and healing that could no longer be addressed through mere retaliation or humiliation, but rather through painful honesty and genuine forgiveness. Lying awake, staring silently at the shadows dancing slowly across my ceiling, I finally understood clearly that the real battle I faced wasn't simply with Carol or even Alex, but rather with the hidden, unspoken pain that had quietly poisoned our family's bonds for decades. And I knew with absolute certainty that confronting this pain openly, honestly, and courageously was the only path forward, even if doing so risked irrevocably changing the relationships I desperately sought to repair. In the aftermath of that emotionally charged evening, when Carol's whispered plea lingered heavily in my thoughts, resonating deeply with the quiet desperation that had seeped into every carefully managed moment of our shared past. I found myself consumed by a restless urgency to uncover fully and finally the complexities underlying her cryptic statement, the hidden narrative she'd hinted at, one that promised to unravel the intricate web of resentment and pain entangling our family for so many years. Driven by both curiosity and the stubborn need for resolution, I spent hours carefully sorting through old family documents, photographs, and handwritten letters stored forgotten in dusty attic boxes, each faded photograph and yellowed letter becoming pieces of a puzzle, whose completion promised not only answers, but perhaps a path toward the closure and peace I'd so longingly sought. Every letter revealed glimpses into a hidden dimension of Carol's emotional struggles, documenting carefully the slow, quiet transformation of a woman who, burdened by the sacrifice she'd made to nurse me back to health as a fragile infant, gradually reshaped her identity around a tightly controlled narrative of victimhood, quietly blaming me, not consciously perhaps, but powerfully nonetheless, for the life she believed I'd indirectly robbed from her. Discovering this painful yet profoundly illuminating truth forced me to confront deeply uncomfortable realities about Carol, reshaping significantly my understanding of her seemingly irrational resentments and controlling behaviors, and leaving me grappling intensely with conflicting feelings of anger, sorrow, and compassion that defied easy resolution or categorization. For days afterward, I wandered through ordinary routines feeling simultaneously liberated and burdened, acutely aware that the revenge I had initially sought through subtle humiliations and carefully calculated embarrassments had evolved unexpectedly into something infinitely more complicated, a journey toward understanding, reconciliation, and ultimately an emotional reckoning powerful enough to either heal or permanently fracture the fragile bonds that remained between us. The choice before me was clear yet daunting. Whether to confront Carol publicly again, armed now with a deeper, more compassionate understanding of her lifelong struggles and secret pain, or to quietly absorb this knowledge, allowing the silence to maintain the fragile stability of our strained relationship, thus perpetuating the cycle of quiet bitterness and carefully concealed wounds that had long defined our interactions. When Alex, perhaps sensing the tension hovering quietly beneath our family's facade, cautiously proposed a delayed celebration of his previously disastrous birthday, intending perhaps to restore some semblance of normalcy, I seized the opportunity as the perfect setting for my final decisive act. Not a revenge born of anger or spite, but rather a gesture of subtle yet powerful emotional clarity, designed specifically to reveal the truth quietly yet unmistakably to everyone present, shifting irrevocably the carefully balanced dynamics Carol had painstakingly crafted around us all. At the celebration, attended cautiously by family members now wary of hidden tensions, I calmly and quietly placed before Carol, in full view of those present, a carefully prepared envelope filled not with accusations or bitterness, but rather with receipts of quiet kindnesses and silent sacrifices I discreetly made for her and Alex over many years, each documented gesture meticulously catalogued, echoing poignantly my earlier dramatic presentation of the birthday cake receipt. My intention was clear yet subtle, offering Carol undeniable evidence of the selfless love and quiet generosity I'd consistently shown, despite her narratives painting me as selfish and attention-seeking, and simultaneously forcing her, without direct accusation or confrontation, to quietly confront the damaging misconceptions she'd so powerfully constructed around my character. The silence following my quiet gesture was profound, charged with an emotional tension that hung thickly in the air, broken only by Carol's visibly trembling hands as she carefully unfolded each receipt, eyes scanning desperately through each entry, her carefully maintained composure dissolving visibly with each documented act of kindness she'd previously chosen to ignore or misconstrue. Watching quietly from a distance, my heart twisted painfully as genuine tears silently spilled down Carol's face, recognizing instantly the depth of shame, sorrow, and quiet remorse reflected in her expression. emotions revealing powerfully the hidden humanity behind her controlled exterior. Finally confronting openly and painfully the truth she'd long denied, her own role in perpetuating the cycle of resentment that had poisoned our family dynamic for so many years. The moment was simultaneously satisfying and profoundly heartbreaking, confirming painfully that the revenge I'd sought, however subtle and justified, had become something much deeper and more emotionally complicated, a reckoning not just for Carol, but equally for myself, forcing me to recognize painfully the extent to which we were both entangled deeply within the very patterns of hurt and misunderstanding we had long blamed each other for creating. As I quietly exited the gathering, leaving Carol silently clutching the envelope, Alex staring thoughtfully at me with newfound understanding, and the family grappling silently with revelations they were not yet prepared to fully comprehend, I felt a complicated blend of liberation and grief, recognizing clearly that my final act had irreversibly altered our family landscape, exposing painfully yet necessarily the unspoken truths that had quietly shaped our interactions for decades. Driving home through familiar streets bathed softly in the gentle glow of streetlights, a profound and complicated peace settled quietly within me, tinged with sadness but unmistakably lighter. Knowing finally that the cycle of silent resentment and hidden pain had been broken, even if the consequences remained uncertain and emotionally complex. Yet, as the miles stretched quietly behind me, illuminated dimly by passing streetlights and blurred headlights, uncertainty still lingered quietly at the edges of my thoughts, challenging gently yet persistently. Whether the revelations and quiet reckonings I'd initiated would ultimately lead to healing, or simply deepen the fractures I'd sought so desperately to mend, leaving unresolved whether my pursuit of truth had truly freed us from our emotional chains, or merely exposed wounds too deep to heal fully.